It had been 3 long years since Bobby the bear had last seen his caretaker Andrew. Bobby had been rescued as a cub and taken to the local reserve, where Andrew had cared for him ever since. But one day, Andrew suddenly disappeared. Bobby did not understand what had happened, and he missed Andrew terribly. Over 3 years passed before Bobby and Andrew saw each other again. Would Bobby still recognize him? Pay close attention to what Bobby the bear does. Andrew had always been a kind and considerate caregiver, making sure Bobby had everything he needed to grow and develop. He played with Bobby for hours, fed him out of his hand, and even went for walks with him on the reservation. But one day, Andrew suddenly disappeared. Bobby was completely upset, clearly wanted nothing more to do with the other caretakers on the reserve. He spent his days waiting and hoping that his caretaker would return. But as the days, weeks, and months turned into years, he began to lose hope. Where had his caretaker Andrew gone? As time passed, it became increasingly clear that Andrew would not be coming back. Bobby became more and more isolated. He stopped accepting food from the remaining caretakers on the reserve and often spent days alone in his cave. Finally, the director, working with the staff, decided to tie the knot. Bobby could no longer stay here. A bear that won't eat and won't socialize with other bears cannot be healthy. We're going to take action now because this cannot keep going like this. The decision was made to release Bobby back into the wild. A decision that many actually said they wanted to share with Andrew as well. But the management disagreed. A week after the decision was made, Bobby was taken via truck to a remote forest where other bears were known to live. The trick was opened and Bobby was evicted. The caretakers watched with heavy hearts as Bobby disappeared into the thick vegetation of the forest, but also knew it was for the best. The only thing that bothered them was that Andrew didn't know anything about this yet. But maybe the park director had a good reason not to tell Andrew, they thought to themselves. In fact, Andrew had run into financial difficulties. Rising living expenses and the cost involved in caring for his ailing mother had finally become too high to continue paying the rent on his house, a house that stood in the reserve's yard and was owned by the director. Many discussions had been exchanged during the months leading up to his resignation. Andrew obviously wanted to continue living on the reservation so he could stay with his bear friend Bobby, but the director did not want to give in. Andrew was fired due to arrears and was no longer welcome on the area. Now what Bobby had now been released into the wild, and Andrew still knew nothing. He sat defeated with his aunt and uncle on the couch where both he and his mother were now staying. How could I have thrown away my future like this? We can't stay here. In addition, being separated from the reservation, and especially from Bobby, felt like a part of his heart was missing. Andrew reluctantly tried to pick up his life anyway, and within 3 years he had gotten a job as an attendant at a zoo. He was happy to be able to work with animals again, but no elephant, kangaroo, or other bear could fill the hole that Bobby had left. But on one random sunny Monday, that suddenly changed. Andrew had just gotten home from work when the doorbell rang at his house. He now had a home to himself again. His mother was now in a care home where she was completely fine again, and thanks to her encouragement, he too had found the strength to get on with his life again. He needed to forget Bobby and everything else that had to do with that park. Lingering in the past will only bring you misery, Andrew, he convinced himself. But when the doorbell rang and Andrew opened it, he suddenly felt like he saw a ghost from the past standing in front of him. It was an old colleague Andrew had worked with on the reservation. The woman had no work clothes on, which Andrew had to get used to. After all, he had only seen Rachel on the reservation in the past, and a uniform was mandatory there. "Hello, Rachel. How are you? What are you coming here to do?" Andrew asked the clearly emotional woman. Rachel explained that she had also been fired by the director, and that her case was for exactly the same reason as Andrew's dismissal. But that was not the main reason she had come by. "In fact, I have something important to tell you, and it's about Bobby," Rachel said. Rachel explained that Bobby was released not long after Andrew was fired. She told how unhappy the bear became, and that they all agreed that Bobby could not stay there. "But why has no one ever said anything to me about this?" Andrew asked his former colleague. But Rachel explained that they were forbidden by the director from sharing Bobby's situation with Andrew. That nasty man really didn't like you, huh? Rachel said, smiling gently. The director threatened to fire anyone who would even speak out of turn. But now that I've been fired, I can finally tell you what happened. Rachel explained that they had released Bobby not very far from here. The reservation and also Andrew's current home were near the Rocky Mountains, where large groups of bears lived in the wild. And somewhere among all those trees, rivers, and bear families lived his Bobby. Andrew could not believe his ears. He jumped up from his chair and hugged Rachel for maybe 2 minutes. That grudge against that nasty man I've long since let go off. But the fact that I might be able to be Bobby again is incredible. What are we waiting for? We have to go find him. Andrew shouted loudly. The sun was just beginning to rise over the tops of the trees as Andrew and Rachel began their journey. They had prepared everything to perfection that night before. You don't just trek into the Rocky Mountains, of course. All the supplies were in their backpacks, and now they were ready to hit the road. Their goal was simple, but ambitious. They would stay in the mountains for up to 24 hours to find Bobby. They would first document his behavior to see if approach was possible. If it was, they would make their approach. The first steps were taken into the forest, and then the search could begin. As Andrew went deeper into the forest, he felt that he was beginning to get excited and curious again. A form of adrenaline and joy coursed through his body, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He hoped to see Bobby again, of course, but having no idea what he would encounter on his journey was also part of the attraction. They hiked for hours, taking in all the splendor of the Rockies. It was beautiful there, and both Andrew and Rachel forgot for a moment what they had come for again. But that feeling didn't last long. As the day progressed, Andrew felt more and more of a sense of frustration. They had searched for hours and had yet to see a single bear. He knew they were out there somewhere, for wet footprints in the mud and droppings were easily spotted all over the place. But a live bear was nowhere to be found, and of course, should they find one, that did not at all mean that bear would definitely be Bobby. "What on earth have we gotten ourselves into?" cried Andrew, and just as he was beginning to lose hope, he heard rustling in the bushes nearby. He froze, his heart racing with excitement. Would this be the moment he had been waiting for? As he approached the bushes, he saw a bit of brown fur just for a split of a second. It was a bear. Andrew's heart skipped a beat as he watched the animal carefully. It seemed to be busily searching for food, completely unaware of Andrew's presence. Andrew couldn't believe his luck. This was exactly what he was hoping for, but the big question was still some time away. So was this bear his Bobby? "How do you know it's Bobby?" Rachel asked Andrew. Andrew laughed softly to make sure the bear wouldn't be startled. "There's only one way to find out." Andrew stepped forward confidently at first, whereupon the bear immediately turned and looked at him sternly. At that moment, Andrew's nerves suddenly shot up. What if he had misjudged this situation? What if this was just a wild bear? Or maybe it was Bobby, but she wouldn't recognize him at all. He looked at Rachel, who was still watching from the bushes, and he began to wonder if he hadn't made a big mistake. Andrew turned and saw a large brown bear standing a few feet away, with 2 piercing eyes on him. Andrew's heart raced as he realized he was most likely face to face with a wild animal. He knew he had to stay calm and do everything he could to prevent the bear from feeling threatened. Andrew slowly stepped back, keeping his eyes on the bear and slowly moving his hand to the pepper spray in his backpack. "It's now or never, because if I don't do something now it's going to go wrong anyway." He spoke to himself in his mind, but just as he was about to go ahead, the bear did something incredible. The bear, which at first was still on its hind legs and growling wildly, had landed again on all 4 of its legs. He now seemed completely calm. To his surprise, the bear did not seem aggressive at all. In fact, as Andrew got closer, the bear seemed to become more and more friendly. He sniffed Andrew, and then gently licked behind Andrew's ears. Andrew remained frozen in place, and then the bear suddenly launched itself up from the ground. He was back on 2 legs and did something heartwarming. He put his arms around Andrew and hugged him lovingly. "Bobby, Andrew gently asked the big brown bear, who had obviously grown considerably over the past few years. Bobby replied with an affirmative long and heavy sigh. It was as if he could hear me and therefore understood the situation immediately. I have never experienced anything so pure, Andrew later told his mother. When the hug was finished, Andrew also asked Rachel if she wanted to say hello. The still a little anxious Rachel carefully came out of the bushes and petted the big friendly bear. They spent the whole day together. They played along the river and watched Bobby scratch nectar from trees with his claws. It was great, Andrew exclaimed enthusiastically. Secretly, he was also glad Bobby was away from the reservation. Here, he could really be himself. Andrew knew that Bobby would be all right and that his gentle giant would not forget him. So he made the following arrangement with Rachel. They would meet every 6 months at Andrew's house for a trip into the mountains. On that day, they would look for Bobby and thus keep the memory of this beautiful bear alive. It's now 2 years after that appointment was made, and again, they were able to find Bobby. In fact, the last time Bobby was the one who found them. He was already arriving with a few fish that he had caught for dinner. Of course, Andrew and Rachel couldn't eat that, but Bobby's gesture was obvious. Andrew and Rachel will be his family is forever. What do you think of this story? Share your thoughts and comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next story.